a little bit different. I'm taking a complete piece from Rabbi Ginzburg, and even though the actual piece is 40 or 50 pages, I'm going to do my best to actually give over the main points of this whole chiddush, this whole article that he wrote. And it's coming from this book. It's called Mivchar Shiurei Hitbonenut, and this is volume Chaf. There's a total, I believe at this point, 25, 26 different volumes of the same series called Mivchar Shiurei Hitbonenut, which means choice teachings or classes based on meditation. In other words, all the classes he's giving over, the purpose is after one learns them to actually meditate on the various ideas. That's been a long-standing teaching from Rav Ginzburg. And of course, at this point, we want to wish him a refuah shlema. Rabbi Yitzchak Feivish ben Brina Malka. Should all be davening for him that he has a refuah shlema, gets stronger day by day. Okay, so this piece that we're learning is called Yetziat Mitzrayim B'Dorenu, coming out of Egypt in our generation. And what he does in the entire piece, and there's hundreds of sub-chidushim, innovative ideas, but he really sticks to a certain kav here, a certain line, and that is comparing how we came out of Egypt the first time and what we are anticipating in the upcoming redemption, where already we certainly have 1 foot in a redemptive framework already. We're back in Eretz Yisrael, rebuilding the land, rebuilding Yerushalayim. We're on the way, not quite there yet. But what do we expect? What is going to be different about the upcoming redemption? So that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be making these comparisons on many, many different levels. So the first one that he brings is that in the Torah, it says that on the night of the last plague, the killing of the firstborn, when we ate matzah and the Korban Pesach, it said we did it standing up with our loins girded, holding a staff in hand, because as we were eating the matzah and the mor and the Korban Pesach, the killing of the firstborn was going on. It wasn't like our Seder now where we're sitting and relaxed. It was high energy, tension, and obviously redemption was in the air, but it wasn't a simple exodus from Egypt. And so the word that is used is b'chipazon. It was like with great anticipation and girding ourselves for what was happening and about to happen. So about the future redemption, so in the Nevi'im, it says like this. It actually says exactly the opposite. It says, Ki lo b'chipazon teitzeyu. Talking about the future redemption. Now this is the Nevi'im from 2,500 years ago, or even older. But they were already anticipating that there would be a final redemption. And they said, Ki lo b'chipazon teitzeyu, u'b'menusa lo telechun, Ki holech lifnechem Hashem u'ma'aspechem Elokei Yisrael. So it says in the future, you will not go out in great stress in a heavy situation, and you will not travel backwards. You will be going forward, Why? Because God is going to be walking with you, and the God of Israel will gather you in. So this is the first comparison that Rav Ginzburg makes, is that in the future, the redemption will, I don't know how to even say it, a calmer situation, circumstances. What comes before it, that we don't know. The Nevi'im have prophesied all kinds of heavy events that could possibly happen. They don't have to happen. But when the actual redemption comes, it will come smoothly because God will be leading the way and he will be walking with us. The second comparison that Rav Ginzburg makes is in Chabad Hasidus. There is a tremendous emphasis on two different processes. One is called Itkafia, and one is called Hafcha. Itkafia means to subdue, to overcome, to suppress. And so we were in the 49th level of impurity in Egypt. Egypt was considered the headquarters of erva in the world, of impurity. And to go from slavery to freedom meant going from states of impurity to purity. And as it were, the evil inclination, the evil in the world, that's how we met Amalek on the way out of Egypt. These forces had to be overcome, had to be subdued. And this is talking about on a national level and an individual level. Rav Ginzburg says in the future, the process will be different. And the avoda will not be so much suppressing and defeating and getting rid of the evil inclination. It will be more transforming evil into good. And this is a teaching from the Baal Shem Tov, who says that Ra kisei l'tov, that evil is a throne for good. In other words, if we were on a high enough level, we would be able to transform, like the evil, the Chacham, the Rasha, we'd be able to transform the Rasha in the moment into goodness. Not so much squelch the Rasha, but to transform, to lift up, to heal. That will be the redemptive energy of the future. Not that we don't have a Yetzer Hara individually and in the whole world, but the emphasis will be on transformation. Hitafcha means to turn over. It's like nafochu. It's the same energy of Purim, is to transform, transcend, and turn evil into good. The next comparison he makes is a very simple one, but a very profound one, because we're actually living it now. When the exodus from Egypt, the redemption from Egypt, the energy was leaving slavery. That was the emphasis, even though the end point was to receive the Torah in Sinai and then to bring it into Eretz Yisrael. But the first step of redemption was certainly to get out. And that's why we're going to call it the 5 expressions of redemption. The 4 expressions of redemption are parallel the 4 cups of wine. And the 5th is the cup of Eliyahu. And it begins with Vahotseti, and I took you out. And then my mind just went slightly. Vitzalti. Thank my wife yelling from the background. Vitzalti, and I saved you. Viga'alti, and I redeemed you. Now I'm going to go back. Vahotseiti means I began the process of taking you out of Egypt, and actually means that the work of slavery ceased even before the end of the 10 plagues, according to the Midrash. V'hitzalti, and I saved you by taking you out of the borders of Egypt. V'ga'alti, and I redeemed you at the Reed Sea. V'lakachti, I took you to be a people to me at Mount Sinai. And the fifth language of redemption is v'heveti, and I brought you into the land. So Rav Ginzburg points out just very simply that the dynamic of the first redemption was to come out of Egypt, to get out of slavery. But in the future, redemption depends on our coming into the land. And that is what's happening right now. So when Rav Ginzburg titled this, Yetziat Mitzrayim B'Dorenu, in our generation, the going out is really the coming in to Eretz Yisrael. Now, obviously, everyone who's here came from somewhere in the Galut, but that wasn't the emphasis. The emphasis now is to come to Eretz Yisrael, to build Eretz Yisrael, and from here, the redemptive process will unfold, will flower. So that's a beautiful understanding of going from the first expression of redemption to the fifth. The first is how it happened the first time, but now it's to come in. Now, based on that, he brings a very, very important pasuk that's repeated a number of times, not exactly in the same way, but it's repeated, and it says, "Be'etzem hayom hazeh hotzi Hashem et bnei Yisrael me'eretz Yisrael al tzivotam." That and the essence of that day, God took bnei Yisrael out of the land of Egypt on their hosts. Sevakot, when we refer to God, is one of the names of God. And this was actually brought down by Hannah in her prayer, her song actually, after giving birth to Shmuel. She's the first one to call God Hashem Sevakot, the God of hosts. But here we see in the Torah that God is calling us his hosts. So this is a very, very beautiful connection of the Jewish people to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that he's called the God of hosts, and he calls us, in a sense, his hosts. So Rav Ginzburg points out that this word Sevakot is also the root of the word for army, the Tzava. And he says that the word Tzava is a combination. The Tzadi is say, go out, like go out to war. And the second two letters, Bet Aleph, is bow, to come in. Now this is very connected to Sefer Devarim, which towards the end of the Torah, one parsha is called Ki Teitzei Lemilchama, when you go out to war. And the next parsha is V'haya Ki Tavo El Haaretz, and when you will come into the land. So Rav Ginzburg points out that the word host, Sevakot, also applies to the army. And the word for army means to go out and to come in, meaning to go out to war and then come back safely. So he says that this is also very connected to how the future redemption will occur, is because the first time, again, the emphasis was on the leaving, going out of Egypt. But as we just said, the emphasis now is to come in to the land. With that in mind, he brings another comparison. Is again, Egypt was considered the headquarters of impurity, of idol worship, sexual impurity, slavery, just everything that we don't want to be involved with. So the spiritual emphasis to get out of Egypt, in a sense, is to leave a certain reality. Whereas in the future, the emphasis is to come into reality and transform physicality to be a proper vessel for spirituality. So not so much where we're leaving from, and here we're talking about reality, that sometimes, let's for example, during as Shabbos begins, we want to leave the mentality of the 6 days of the week. And on Shabbos, we want to come in to a new reality. So that's what he's saying. Excuse me, the redemption in the future is not so much of getting out of this terrible situation we were in. It's more actually going into reality and healing it, fixing it, rectifying it, transforming it, and transcending it. Just like we said, evil is a throne for good. Here, reality becomes a throne. Physicality, materialism becomes the throne of spirituality. And that is what the Mashiach will teach the world. Not what type of reality we need to leave, but how to delve into and dive into reality and transform it into a spiritual reality. Another comparison he makes is that when we came out of Egypt, of course, 7 weeks later, we were at Mount Sinai and received the Torah. And the emphasis in receiving the Torah, we all know that we received a written Torah and an oral Torah. But the emphasis with the 10 Commandments was to receive the body, the nigla of the Torah, the revealed Torah, along with the revealed oral tradition. But it was revealed. Before and leading up to the final redemption, the Zohar says this clearly, and all of Chassidut follows this idea. And I would say especially Rav Ginzburg, this is one of his absolute main fundamental teachings, is that part of the process of Mashiach coming is the spreading of the inner dimensions of the Torah, whether we call it Kabbalah or Chassidut or the mystical tradition or Torah Tachen, Maaseh Merkava, Maaseh Bereshit, that this is what the Zohar said. The Zohar said that with the spreading of the teachings that are found in the Zohar, that the final redemption would come berachamim, would come in great compassion. And all of Hasidus is really based on the idea that the farther we get from Sinai, the closer we get to Mashiach. And the closer we get to Mashiach means the more and more of the hidden dimensions of the Torah will be revealed. And we saw that it was only in the late 1200s that the Zohar was actually spread beyond a very, very small group of people that maintained this tradition from generation to generation. And then, of course, with the Arizal and the whole golden period of Tzvat, of Kabbalah, and then the Baal Shem Tov and succeeding Rebbes of Chassidut, we see more and more of the secrets of the Torah, the inner dimensions of the Torah are being revealed, because this is part and parcel of the Messianic, the steps of the Messianic era that will lead to the full redemption. Now, the last one that Rav Ginzburg brings before, in a sense, he switches gears, but it's based on what I'm going to say now. And that is a saying that's said about Moshe Rabbeinu, a well-known saying, is Hu HaGoel HaRishon, Hu HaGoel HaAcharon. He is the first Redeemer, and he will be the last Redeemer. What we learn from this is that the soul of Moshe will be present in the Mashiach, along with David. Of course, it's David, it's Mashiach ben David, but we're told and explained that as it were, the body of the Mashiach is from David, and the soul of Mashiach is from Moshe. Now, obviously, part of the body is, of course, the nefesh and the ruach and all the other parts as well. But we're told that the essence of Mashiach is Moshe. He is the first Redeemer, and he will be the last Redeemer. So this goes along with the comparisons we've been making, that as the first Redeemer, he brought us out of Egypt, and as the last Redeemer, he will bring us into the Messianic era. Now, based on this, so first of all, he brings the source of where do they learn that Moshe is the final Redeemer, and we know he was the first Redeemer. So it says, Ma shehaya hu sheyiyah. That which was, that is what will be. Now, the first three words, Ma shehaya, Ma sheyeh haya. Let me get it right. I'm sorry. 1 second. Ma shehaya hu sheyeh. What would I do without my wife in the background? What would I do? I'll tell you the truth. It's not easy to keep all of these ideas straight for any teacher. Anyways, so the Rashi Tevot is Moshe. Ma shehaya hu sheyiyah. Mem shin he. So that which was meaning in the first redemption, where Moshe was the leader, he will be the leader in the future redemption. That's we'll call it the text source for this idea. Okay, so now Rav Ginzburg takes these ideas and he attaches it to another idea. There are 4 people in the Torah who God calls by name twice in a row. It's Avraham Avraham, Yaakov Yaakov, Shmuel Shmuel, and Moshe Moshe. By Avram, Yaakov, and Shmuel, Avram was at the Akedah when he was bringing up Yitzchak to offer him up. By Yaakov is when God had told him, I'll be with you when you come down to Egypt. He called him by name twice. Shmuel, if you remember the story, when he was a young boy and he was being raised by Eli, the Kohen Gadol, he heard a voice in the middle of the night. And what he heard is God was calling his name, Shmuel, Shmuel. Now, in all of these cases, you won't see them in the text or in the Sefer Torah, but the oral tradition is that there is what's called a psik, a line between the two names, actually a thick line between the two names. The only one that is different is Moshe. There's no line between his two names. And so this is, the expression is Moshe, Moshe, lo pasik ta'ama begave. When it says Moshe, Moshe, there is no dividing line within his two names. Whereas the others is psik ta'ama begave. There is a dividing line. So Rav Ginzburg explains what's the difference here. Here we're all talking about such holy giants, but they all had this psik. And then he points out an amazing thing. There's another place in the Torah where God calls by name twice, and that's his own name, with the 13 midot rachamim. Hashem, Hashem, kel rachum v'chanun. And according to oral tradition, there's a line in between. So you think, oh my gosh, Moshe doesn't have a line between his two names and Hashem does? So Rav Ginzburg explains that the reason of these lines, even by Hashem's name, is because with the 13 midot rachamim, that's exactly the point. It was directed at the midot, which means the 7 lower sfirot. Whereas by Moshe was coming from a higher world. He was coming from the world of Atzilut. He was coming from a higher level than Avram, Yaakov, and Shmuel. And therefore, there was no line. This is the first thing we're going to say. There was no line between his lower sfirot, his midot, his characteristics, and his intellect. There was no line in between. And that Moshe was Chachma, Bina, and Dat. How do we know that? Because Moshe is the one who, through him, the Torah was given. And it says, Doraita mechachma nikavta, that from wisdom comes the Torah. The Gemara says about Moshe, Moshe zacha lebina. Moshe merited to Bina. And the generation that came out of Egypt is called Dor Deah. And since Moshe, he was the tzaddik of the generation. So he was the dat that everyone in the generation, the tzaddik bedor, that everyone attached themselves to. And that's why they were called the Dor Deah, because of Moshe. So that's how Rav Ginzburg explains why there's no line between Moshe. And even when he's named by Bat Paro, Moshe min hamayim mishitihu. And we know also from the Gemara, ein mayim ela Torah. Anytime the word water is mentioned, it's a hint to Torah itself. So you could read, instead of from the water, he was drawn, it can be read from the Torah, he was drawn, because he's coming from the same source that the Torah is coming from. So Rav Ginzburg now takes this idea and connects it to the first idea of the comparison between the first time we came out of Egypt, the first redemption, and the final redemption. So the first one he brings what we've just been talking about, that in every person, even Avram, Yaakov, Shmuel, the intellect and the midot aren't totally in tune. I remember Reb Shlomo once taught about peyot. He said the purpose of peyot is to connect the head to the heart. And he said, what is the greatest distance in the world? It's not us in some galaxy 200,000 light years away. He said it's between the mind and the heart. That's the biggest difference in the world. So the first redemption began the process of trying to put together the mind and the heart. The final redemption is when we will achieve that. We will achieve this idea that there will be no psik. Now, all the examples I'm going to bring now, what Rav Ginzburg is saying is that the first redemption, there's a psik, there's a disconnect. And the final redemption will be the healing of the disconnect, and it'll be like Moshe. Moshe, lo pasik ta'ama b'gaveh. There'll be no division between intellect and the emotions, between the mind and the heart. So that was the first example he brings. The next example he brings is that at the burning bush, when Moshe asked God, I'm going to go back and they're going to ask me, who sent you? Who should I tell them? So in a very important passage, God says, tell them, Ekia asher Ekia sent you. But the next sentence says, tell them Ekia sent you. Now there's a classic Rashi, an amazing Rashi. Why the difference? Why did God say, tell them Ekia asher Ekia? Ekia asher Ekia means I will be that what I will be. So Rashi says that there was a dialogue between God and Moshe. And God explained that this name means I will be with you in this exile, like I'll be with you in the future exiles. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, Rabbona Sha'olam, it's not enough that they're suffering in this exile. I have to now tell them there's going to be future exiles. And God says, Moshe, great point. Just tell them that Eki has sent you. I'm with you now. So that's a classic Rashi, an amazing Rashi. So Rav Ginzburg says that, but what we were being told here is that this name, Ekia Asher Ekia, this will be the name of the future redemption when Mashiach comes. Only then will the full name be revealed. Now, at the time of coming out of Egypt, there was a psik, there was a line. It was just Ekia. Tell them that Ekia sent you, because we're not on the level yet that the full name can be revealed. This is very, very much like when we fought against Amalek. And the verse says that God puts his hand al case ka, on the throne of God. And Rashi points out that the word case, which means throne, is written missing a letter, the aleph. And the name of God is only the 2-letter name God, not the full 4-letter name God. And Rashi says is because until Amalek, evil, is defeated in this world, God's throne is not complete and his name is not complete. So this is the same idea. In other words, in the throne of God, there's a psik. It's not the full name. And in the name of God, it's only the yud and the hey. It's not the full 4-letter name of God. But in the future, it will be. So that's the same idea here. Now, the next one is a very, very interesting one. And this has to do with Gilgulim, reincarnation. According to our mystic tradition, beginning even before the Zohar, in the Bahir, and then the Zohar, and then it was just expanded tremendously by the Arizal, and then continued by Hasidut, is we have a very firm tradition of reincarnation. This is not the forum to go into the whole idea of reincarnation, but what we can say is, except for very few people, rare people, do not remember their previous reincarnations. And we're actually told that it's a good thing, because if not, we'd have this terrible burden upon us that we probably would not be emotionally able to deal with if we knew all of our Gilgulim and all the things that we've done. I'm sure we did good things, but we probably did not such good things. So actually, the Arizal, he was known, people came to him and asked, please reveal my previous reincarnation so I know what to fix. And the Ari would. He would reveal a person's like full soul history. The Baal Shem Tov, there's actually a number of famous stories where he actually also did, but he explained that for him this was a rare exception, that the Baal Shem, who could tell people's previous lifetimes, he didn't feel it was psychologically or emotionally positive for people to know. And he said very simply is, and the Slonim Rebbe explains this very clearly, and Rav Ginzburg also holds by this, is that we have enough signs in our own lives now to know what we have to fix. In other words, everyone knows themselves the best, and we know the things that we have to fix. We might not always have the vessels to fix them, but most of them know where our faults are where we're lacking. And therefore, that's enough, because it in a certain way, it's based on previous Gilgulim. So you don't, in a sense, have to know your previous Gilgulim to know what to fix in this lifetime. But Rav Ginzburg said that in the future, we will have the Kalim, we'll have the psychological vessels to be able to see our soul history. And at that point, it will be a positive thing, because it will fill in so much of the missing, let's say, information that we might need to reach our fulfillment spiritually. So in other words, up to now, there's a psik between our lifetime now and our previous lifetimes. There's like a line, the psik. But in the future, lo psik ta'ama b'gaveh, there won't be this. We'll be able to deal with our whole soul history and use it for only for the good. So that was a very interesting idea. So now he brings another one. We're getting towards the end here, and remember, we will open up for questions and comments. So I think everyone knows the famous Rashi when we came to Har Sinai. So it said, the verse in the Torah says, Vayichan Yisrael Sham, that Israel camped there. And the word camped is in the singular. So Rashi, in one of his most famous comments, says, Ki'ish achad b'lev achad. It was written in the singular because we camped there. We were all in the same headspace, with one person with one heart. So this is like an example of lo psik ta'ama b'gaveh. In other words, there wasn't these differences, these divisions, these disconnects between Jews. But the end of the Rashi says it's implied that in every other place we have these divisions. That was the unique circumstances of receiving the Torah in Sinai. And in fact, from this we can learn that had we not been Ki'ish Echad B'Lev Echad, we wouldn't have been fitting to receive the Torah. The Torah could only be given when we were in that headspace. But this is not our usual. In other words, we have these seeks, we have these divisions. Today's election day. This is like we've been overwhelmed with it for weeks, 2 years now. Fourth election in 2 years. And unfortunately, so much we could see the divisions in Am Yisrael. And of course, the idea is when Mashiach comes, this Ki'ish Echad B'Lev Echad will become a permanent situation. In other words, all of the divisions, it won't necessarily happen in a snap of the fingers, but we're going towards a world of peace. And we could add here, we'll add Rav Ginzburg's idea called the Fourth Revolution, where it's now time to teach Torah to the world. The Torah is in desperate, the world is in desperate need of Torah, Jews included, but the whole world is in desperate need. And there's an enormous awakening. It's almost like a flood of people around the world, especially Christians, but not just Christians, that are becoming aware that they need to connect to the Jewish people and to the Torah. That's a whole other subject in of itself. So ultimately, the vision of Mashiach is also that there won't be such a division between Jew and non-Jew, because at a certain point we will all recognize and worship the one God. So the Messianic era is represented by Lo Pasik Ta'ama B'Gabei. There won't be this line between, in a sense, all peoples. So that is a review of the ideas that Rav Ginzburg gave over in this piece. And of course, there's a lot to think about here. And really the important thing, I would say, for this Seder is, of course, we're going to tell the whole story of coming out of Egypt. And we even start going back to Avram and Yaakov and Lavan. We tell the whole story of where we're coming from. And in the Haggadah is where we are going to. And this is, when we sing Hallel at the end of Seder, this is like the great Hallel, once a year. This is Mashiach energy. This is total redemption. But because of the reality in the world today, where we've seen in the last approximately 140, 150 years, the ingathering of the exiles, the rebuilding of the land, the replanting of the land. Israel, especially in the last 20 years, has turned into a major world power. It's a bit mind-blowing, but economically, politically, especially technologically, we are, and now it's like the vaccine nation. We are leading the world in so many different ways. And now it's time, it's just a few more steps till we become a light unto the nations. We're doing it already on the physical level, and we're sharing this information with people around the world. All over Asia and Africa, there's a tremendous revolution happening in agriculture and water because of Israeli technology that we're not just commercially, but we're going out and spreading this. The redemption to come is more to take that, but to add the component of becoming a spiritual light into the nations. So when we're sitting at the Seder now, it's not like 200-300 years ago where we were dreaming of returning to Israel. I mean, even 75 years ago, okay, there were Jews in Israel, but during the Holocaust, things looked so bleak. And here we are 75 years later, and even though sometimes redemption feels far away, in truth, we are very close. We are very, very close. Virtually every sign that the prophets of Israel said would happen is happening. And the last things really is a redeemer and rebuilding of the temple, and the final gathering of the exiles, and bringing a world of peace and harmony. All of this was promised by God through the prophets, and we're seeing it. So this idea of Yetziat Mitzrayim B'Dorenu, a lot of what we went over is a concept that Rav Ginzburg brings all the time, is drawing the future into the present by already putting our headspace, our consciousness into how it will be in the future. That draws it into the present, which then makes the future, in a sense, come sooner. And so I want to end with a bracha that this Pesach, we really focus on what's happening in the world and our place in it, and what we can do individually as a community and all of Israel to bring the final redemption closer. And on a more personal level is that each and every one of us has our own Egypts to get out of. And it's a national story, but each and every person knows very, very well our limitations, our obstacles, our lackings. And the blessing is that the energy of Pesach, the energy of renewal and new life in the spring and redemption, creates a personal redemption for each and every one of us.